kept shooting him while his back was under the truck. You kept shooting him, man. You kept shooting him in his back. His back was turned to you, man. He was trying to get away from you, and you murdered him, man, like that. You murdered him, man, like that.
April 4th, 2014, Miami-Dade County Criminal Court. The courtroom is packed wall to wall for the sentencing hearing of Lukace Kendle, the armed security guard who shot and killed 29-year-old Kijuan Byrd outside a Miami strip club 2 years earlier. The judge's bench towers over rows of wooden benches filled with family members, reporters, and curious observers who have followed this case through years of legal delays. In the third row of the gallery sits Donald Byrd, Kijuan's father, wearing his best dark suit and clutching a folder of court documents with hands that haven't stopped shaking since that phone call from Miami police in June 2012. His wife sits beside him, tissues already crumpled in her lap from the morning's testimony. Kendle's public defender is making a final plea to the judge, asking him to consider Kendle's diagnosed mental illness and send him to a psychiatric facility for treatment instead of prison. The lawyer's voice is calm and professional as he describes impulse control disorders and the need for medical intervention rather than punishment. Before we dive into this heartbreaking case that divided Miami and went viral across the country, drop a comment and let me know what city you're watching from, because this story touches families everywhere. That's when Donald Byrd reaches his breaking point. After sitting silently through hours of testimony about his son's killer needing help instead of punishment, he can't take another word. He shoots up from his seat like a man possessed, pointing directly at Kendle and screaming words that would echo across social media for years to come. "You murdered my son, man, for nothing! He was trying to get away from you!" The entire courtroom turns to stare as security guards rush toward him. But Donald isn't finished. His voice cracks with 2 years of bottled rage and grief as he keeps shouting over their attempts to quiet him. "He wasn't crazy when he killed my son. He knew exactly what he was doing." But to understand this father's complete breakdown and why his pain resonated with millions of viewers online, we have to go back to June 1st, 2012, and a strip club parking lot where a routine night out turned into a family's worst nightmare. This is Accused, where we dig into the cases that reveal how quickly ordinary nights turn into family nightmares. Kijuan Byrd was shot 11 times by an armed security guard who claimed self-defense against 2 unarmed men. If understanding these broken moments in our justice system matters to you, hit that subscribe button. It's free, and it helps more families like Donald Byrd's get their stories heard. This case exposed dangerous gaps in Florida's security guard licensing and became a symbol of how racial fear can turn deadly in seconds. The surveillance footage tells one story, but the courtroom drama tells another. This is how a routine night out became a father's worst nightmare and a viral moment that sparked national debates about justice, race, and when deadly force crosses the line. Kijuan Byrd was 29 years old when he died on June 2nd, 2012, described by his father Donald as a good man who worked hard and stayed away from trouble. His family remembers him as someone who always tried to help others and never looked for conflict with anyone. That Friday night, June 1st, he was with his longtime friend, Michael Smathers, both planning what should have been a normal night out in Miami after a long week of work. They decided to visit Club Lex, a strip club located on Northwest 27th Avenue in an area of Miami where police were familiar with occasional disturbances, but nothing like what was about to happen. The club employed several security guards to keep order, including 26-year-old Lukace Kendle, a white man who had been working there for several months, despite a troubled background that should have raised red flags. Kendle carried a concealed weapon as part of his security duties, which required a license from the state of Florida. What the licensing board didn't know, and what would later become crucial evidence in the trial, was that Kendle had serious mental health issues that were never properly evaluated during his background check. Prison psychiatrists who examined him after the shooting would diagnose him with impulse control disorder and antisocial personality disorder, conditions that made him dangerous when combined with a weapon and authority. When Byrd and Smathers pulled into the Club Lex parking lot that night around 2:30 a.m., they had no way of knowing they were about to encounter a man whose mental state and access to deadly weapons would turn a simple night out into a family's worst nightmare and a case that would expose serious flaws in Florida's security industry. The shooting happened in the early morning hours of June 2, 2012, in the parking lot outside Club Lex. Multiple security cameras positioned around the building captured the entire incident from different angles, creating a detailed record of everything that transpired in those crucial minutes. The footage shows Byrd and Smathers sitting in their parked vehicle when Kendle approached them while armed with his service weapon. What happened next contradicted every claim Kendle would later make to police and prosecutors. The surveillance video clearly shows Kendle firing multiple shots toward the men's parked car without any visible provocation or threat from the victims. There was no verbal confrontation captured on the audio, no weapons visible in the victim's possession, and no apparent reason for Kendle to fear for his safety. The most disturbing part of the footage shows what happened when the two men tried to escape. Byrd was shot a total of 11 times as he attempted to flee from the vehicle, with several of those shots hitting him in the back as he tried to get away from Kendle. Michael Smathers was also hit multiple times and left paralyzed from the waist down, but he survived to become the key witness who would later testify about what really happened that night. When police arrived at the scene minutes later, they found Kendle standing over the victims, immediately claiming self-defense and telling officers he had feared for his life. But the surveillance footage told a completely different story that would ultimately seal Kendle's fate in court. The video evidence showed two men desperately trying to flee, while an armed security guard continued firing at them, turning what Kendle claimed was self-defense into clear evidence of murder and attempted murder. Here's a question for you. You're working security outside a club. Two men are sitting in a parked car in the lot. You can't see any weapons, and they haven't threatened you. Do you approach them to ask what they're doing, call for police backup, or draw your weapon and start shooting? Think about your answer, because what happened next changed everything for multiple families. The evidence would show that Kendle chose option 3, and his decision destroyed lives that night. Kendle was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and attempted murder just days after the shooting. The surveillance footage was the key evidence that contradicted his self-defense claims. Miami-Dade prosecutors reviewed the video and saw what really happened. There was no imminent threat, no weapons visible, and no justification for deadly force. Byrd and Smathers were trying to leave when Kendle opened fire. The investigation revealed that Kendle had a history of mental health issues and previous run-ins with the law, yet he had been licensed to carry a weapon as a security guard. This case would later prompt CNN and the Center for Investigative Reporting to conduct a year-long investigation into the licensing of armed security guards in Florida. The system had failed, and two families were paying the price. For Donald Byrd, watching his son's killer get arrested was just the beginning of a legal journey that would test his faith in justice. The trial didn't begin until 2015, 3 long years after the shooting. Kendle decided to represent himself in court despite being declared mentally incompetent twice before the trial. This decision would turn the courtroom into a circus and add another layer of pain for the Byrd family. Kendle used racial arguments in his defense, claiming he was being prosecuted because he was white. He even told the jury he was arrested because of the George Zimmerman case, trying to connect his situation to the controversial Florida shooting that had divided the nation. Prosecutors presented the surveillance footage that clearly showed Kendle firing at 2 unarmed men who were trying to escape. Medical testimony detailed how Byrd died from multiple gunshot wounds and how Smathers would never walk again. Throughout it all, Donald Byrd sat in the gallery, watching the man who killed his son try to convince a jury that he was the real victim. The breaking point came during the sentencing phase. After Kendle's attorney suggested he belonged in a mental institution instead of prison, Donald Byrd had heard enough. 2 years of legal proceedings, 2 years of watching his son's killer make excuses, 2 years of seeing Kendle blame everyone except himself. Donald couldn't contain his anger as he started yelling at Kendle from the gallery. "You murdered my son, man, for nothing!" he screamed, his voice echoing through the courtroom. "He was trying to get away from you." Security guards moved quickly to restrain him, but Donald wasn't finished. As they escorted him toward the door, he turned back one more time. "He wasn't crazy when he killed my son." The outburst was captured on video and later went viral, showing the raw pain of a father who had lost everything to senseless violence. The judge cleared the courtroom and called a recess, but the damage was done. Donald's breakdown had given voice to what many families feel when they watch killers try to escape responsibility. The jury didn't buy Kendle's excuses. He was convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Kendle was sentenced to life imprisonment for the second-degree murder of Byrd and 30 years in prison for the attempted second-degree murder of Smathers. The judge noted the senseless nature of the violence and the lasting impact on both families. Michael Smathers, now confined to a wheelchair for life, gave a victim impact statement about how the shooting had destroyed his mobility and independence. Donald Byrd also spoke, this time in a controlled courtroom setting, about losing his son and watching the legal system struggle to make sense of such pointless violence. Even with the conviction, the pain would never end. Justice on paper couldn't bring back Kijuan or give Michael back his legs. This case exposed serious problems in Florida's security guard licensing system. Despite Kendle's criminal history and mental health issues, he had passed the required background checks for his security position. The shooting prompted CNN and the Center for Investigative Reporting to spend a year investigating how armed security guards get licensed across the country. They found gaps that put the public at risk and recommended stricter oversight. The viral video of Donald Byrd's outburst also sparked broader conversations about how families cope with violence and whether our courtrooms are equipped to handle the raw emotion that comes with murder trials. For the Byrd family, the case became a symbol of what happens when the system fails to protect people and then fails again to provide real accountability. Today, Lukace Kendle remains in prison serving his life sentence. His appeals have been unsuccessful, and he will likely never be released. Michael Smathers has become an advocate for gun violence survivors, speaking about his experience and the ongoing challenges of life with paralysis. Donald Byrd continues to honor his son's memory while dealing with the trauma of that June night and the courtroom confrontation that made him famous for all the wrong reasons. The Club Lex shooting case is studied in criminal justice programs as an example of how mental health, racial tension, and inadequate security training can combine with deadly results. Tomorrow, we'll examine another case where a father's search for justice led him down a path that changed everything. If these stories about families fighting for truth matter to you, subscribe to Accused because these voices deserve to be heard. Sometimes the most powerful moments in our justice system happen when grief meets rage in a courtroom and a father's love refuses to stay silent. That's exactly what happened when Donald Byrd decided he couldn't watch his son's killer hide behind excuses anymore.